Have you ever, been totally engrossed in a book or a podcast, and you get that sudden jolt of inspiration? That I can do this, I'm going to change feeling.
Oh, absolutely. That spark can be incredibly motivating.
Right. But then life sort of swoops back in,
Yeah.
and that initial fired up feeling, poof, gone.
It's so common though, isn't it?
Totally. And it makes you wonder, why is it so hard to actually ACT on knowledge? It's like our brains get the theory, but struggle with putting it into practice.
It's a question that's puzzled people for ages, I think. And the thing is, there's a book for that. No can do. Put your know-how into action.
I love that it's not just no and do, but no can do. It's
Yeah.
like it acknowledges that can part is where things get tricky.
Exactly. And we're talking about a pretty solid team behind this book. We've got Ken Blanchard. You might know him from The 1 Minute Manager.
Oh, a classic.
Yeah, absolutely. So Blanchard, along with co-authors Paul J. Meyer and Dick Ruhe, they really dig into this whole knowing-doing gap. And what I find interesting is they don't just give you, a list of do this, then that. They try to unpack why we struggle to act on good ideas in the first place.
It's tempting to just blame it on willpower, right? Like, oh, I'm just bad at willpower.
Mm.
But maybe it goes deeper than that.
That's exactly what they're saying. It's not so much about willpower being the problem, but method being the missing ingredient. It's knowing, then method, then doing.
So instead of beating ourselves up for not having enough willpower, we need to find a system, a method that works. Like knowing I should get in shape is one thing, but actually having a workout plan is what makes it happen.
100%. And they break this method down into dealing with what they call the 3 villains of action. The first one is something I think we can all relate to, especially these days: information overload.
Oh, don't even get me started. It's like my brain is a browser with 100 tabs open all the time. No wonder I can't focus on applying anything new. There's always more stuff coming in.
Right. The book talks about how we're almost addicted to getting new information, even if we haven't fully used what we already know. Think about it. Isn't starting a new book sometimes more appealing than actually finishing the one you're on?
Ouch. Yeah, it looks too close to home there. So we go for the new and shiny instead of mastering what we've already got. No wonder we feel stuck. So how do we actually combat this information overload then?
Well, no can do suggests a less but better approach. So instead of trying to consume everything, be super picky about what you choose to learn. Focus on really deep dives into the stuff that truly matters to you.
So it's about being more discerning about the information we allow into our lives.
Exactly. Like a curated knowledge buffet instead of an all-you-can-eat information dumpster fire.
Now that is an image. I like that a lot. But then how do we make sure that knowledge, the stuff we choose, actually sticks?
And that, my friend, is where repetition comes in.
See, I've always thought of repetition as a bit. Boring. Just drilling facts into your head,
I hear you, but the kind of repetition they're talking about isn't about mindlessly repeating information. It's more about engaging with it deeply, revisiting it from different angles, asking yourself how it connects to your life. Each time you revisit something, you understand it a little bit better, and it becomes a little bit more ingrained in your thinking. It's quality of learning over quantity of information, really.
Okay, so deep dives and repetition. I'm starting to see the framework here.
Yeah.
But let's be real, sometimes even when I do manage to focus on something new, my brain is a master at shooting it down before it even has a chance.
You've come face to face with the second villain, negative filtering. It's like our brains are hardwired to look for reasons why something won't work, especially if it challenges what we already believe.
It's that inner voice, right? The one that whispers, yeah, that'll never work for you, before you've even tried anything. It's incredibly frustrating. So how do we deal with that? Positive affirmations, a good motivational playlist.
While those things can be helpful, No Can Do has a really intriguing technique called green light thinking.
Okay, green light thinking. I'm definitely intrigued. Tell me more.
So imagine this. Your brain's got this new idea in front of it. Now, instead of instantly hitting the brakes, listing all the reasons why it won't work, green light thinking is like slamming on the gas, at least for a little bit. You spend a few minutes really looking for what's good about the idea, exploring the positives, almost like you're trying to sell yourself on it,
So it's like, what, temporarily silencing that inner critic and just going full-on optimist for a bit?
Exactly. And the thing is, our brains are kind of wired to scan for threats, right? It's like this ancient survival mechanism. And negative filtering, that's kind of like that on overdrive. But when we force ourselves to look for the good, even just for a few minutes, we might find those perceived threats actually start to shrink down a bit.
So instead of my brain being this fortress that's guarding against new ideas, it becomes more like an explorer, seeking out hidden treasure and all that. I
Yeah.
like that. But then what about like the valid concerns? Do we just ignore those completely with this green light thinking?
Not at all. No Can Do talks about a yellow light stage that comes after. So green light is all about exploring the possibilities. And then yellow light is where you get to put your analytical hat on, weigh those potential downsides, get realistic about the challenges.
Ah, okay. So it's not about being naive. It's just shifting that initial knee-jerk reaction.
Yeah.
Instead of defaulting to this will never work, it's how could this work? It's such a subtle shift, but it feels powerful.
You've hit on something really crucial there, Eliza, about rewiring that default mode, which, you guessed it, is where repetition comes in again.
Right. It keeps popping up. So it's like the more we consciously green light new ideas, the stronger that mental muscle gets.
Think of it this way. Every time we choose to focus on the positive potential instead of instantly jumping to the negative, we're kind of reinforcing that pathway in our brains. We're essentially training ourselves to be more open-minded, less resistant to change.
Okay, so we're swapping out those old rusty mental gears for a shiny new set. But even then, even if we've got the information overload handled, we're green lighting like champs.
Yeah.
There's still that pesky issue of, well, life just getting in the way. You know how it is.
And that, my friend, brings us to the third villain of action, lack of follow-up. We get all fired up about an idea, maybe we even start taking action, but then that initial motivation kind of fizzles out, and we never quite make it a habit.
Ugh, this one is so relatable. It's like signing up for that 6 a.m. yoga class with the best intentions in the world, and then hitting the snooze button every single morning.
Exactly. We overestimate the power of a single burst of motivation, I think, and we underestimate how important that consistent, sustained effort is over time. Even something as simple as a company wanting to use a one-page performance dashboard. The book gave that example. It took weeks of tweaking and reminding before it actually stuck for them.
It makes sense, though, right? Real change, lasting change, it rarely happens overnight. No matter how great the idea is on paper, it's the follow-through, the consistency that really makes the difference. So how do we bridge that gap then? Besides, like, a whole lot of sticky notes.
Well, hey, sticky notes can definitely help, but No Can Do really emphasizes two main things. First, systems. Don't rely on willpower alone. Think about things like accountability partners, maybe joining a group of people working towards similar goals, that kind of thing. It's about building an environment that actually supports those new habits you're trying to build.
So less about, I need to have more willpower, and more about, I need a better support system in place. Makes sense. What's the second thing?
Celebrating those small wins. It's so easy to fixate on just the end goal, which can be really demotivating if it feels far off. But if we take the time to actually celebrate each step in the right direction, we're actually reinforcing those behaviors, making them more likely to stick over time.
It's like we're almost like tricking our brains into craving those little wins by associating them with positive feelings, right?
Exactly. You're creating this positive feedback loop. And you know what? This all circles back to our friend, repetition.
You're right. It's everywhere, isn't it? We've got repetition in how we learn. Deep dives instead of surface skimming. Repetition in how we overcome resistance. Using that green light thinking over and over. And now, repetition in how we actually stick with things. Consistent effort and letting those small wins add up over time.
It's like No Can Do is giving us the blueprint for building a machine, right? A knowing doing machine, and repetition is the fuel that keeps the whole thing running.
Okay, I am loving that analogy.
Right.
But I'm curious, from all of this, what's really stood out to you as the most impactful part of the No Can Do philosophy?
You know, it's funny. We talk about these systems and habits almost like it's a recipe, right? But the real secret ingredient, the thing that makes it all click, I think it's our own understanding of how our minds work.
What do you mean?
Well, the book, it touches on this briefly, but knowing how our brains actually form habits, that can be the key to making all these techniques even more effective. And that, my friend, is a rabbit hole I am always happy to go down.
So it's like the more we know about the science of our own minds, the better we can actually use these tools, not just going through the motions, but understand the why behind it all.
100%. Like,
Huh.
think about it. If you know your brain releases dopamine when you experience a reward, suddenly celebrating those small wins makes even more sense. You're basically like intentionally triggering that reward system,
Yeah.
right? Making it way more likely you'll repeat those good behaviors.
It's like we're hacking our own brains for success.
I love it. Okay, so for our listener out there, maybe they're taking notes, maybe they're just along for the ride. What's the big takeaway we want them to leave with from no can do?
I'd say this. If they've ever felt that frustration, that I know I should, but I just can't seem to make myself do it feeling,
Yeah.
they are not alone. That's not a personal feeling. It's just being human.
It's like we're all wired that way to some extent.
Exactly. But the good news is, knowing that makes it solvable.
Right. It's not about beating ourselves up. It's about understanding how our brains tick and figuring out how to work with them, not against them.
And that's where that whole method approach is so powerful. It's not some magic bullet, right? It's about having a system, understanding your own tendencies, and honestly, being kind to yourself through the whole process. It's so important, that self-compassion piece. So to wrap things up for today, if you're feeling overwhelmed by information, don't try to learn it all. Master a few things that really matter. If you're hitting resistance, break out that green light thinking. Look for the possibilities, even if they seem, I don't know, a little out there at first.
And don't forget those support systems, right?
Oh, right. Create systems that support you taking consistent action, whether it's sticky notes, accountability buddies, whatever works for you. And while you're at it, celebrate those wins along the way. You deserve it.
Absolutely. Give yourself permission to be proud of each step in the right direction.
Couldn't agree more. This deep dive has given us a lot to think about, and more importantly, to act on. So until next time, happy learning, everyone, and keep those green lights shining.